So here's something that's been getting lost under the Iran ceasefire negotiations and the Trump-China summit coverage. While all of that was happening, while Trump was on Air Force One heading to Beijing, the United States was finalizing an agreement with the Philippines that is, by any reasonable measure, unlike anything it has signed with an ally in modern history. The Wall Street Journal broke the story. The US and the Philippines have agreed to establish a high-tech manufacturing and mineral processing zone on the island of Luzon, the Philippines' northernmost island, close to the Taiwan Strait. The site is 4,000 acres. The US will occupy it rent-free. It will be administered as a special economic zone. It will carry diplomatic immunity, the kind afforded to an embassy. And critically, it will operate under US common law, not Philippine law, American law, on Philippine soil. The lease is 2 years, renewable for up to 99 years. And the official quoted in that Wall Street Journal article explaining the whole thing, the Undersecretary of State for Economic Affairs, Jacob Hellberg, was very direct about the goal. If you look at the whole supply chain stack, layer after layer, it is totally dominated by China. That's the sentence the entire deal is built around. My name is James Whitmore. I've spent the last few weeks on this channel tracing the US-China competition and the Hormuz crisis. This is the piece that connects all of it, and it's the piece that's causing the most controversy on the ground. Let's start with why the Philippines specifically. The Philippines has a lot of things the US currently needs and can't get comfortably from China. Nickel. The Philippines is the world's second largest producer. Copper, chromite, cobalt. These are the materials that go into semiconductors, electric vehicle batteries, advanced weapon systems. The entire Pax Silica initiative, the US-led effort to build alternative supply chains for critical minerals and advanced chips, cutting China out, runs on these materials. And right now, China processes the overwhelming majority of the world's critical minerals at every stage of the supply chain, from mining to refinement to manufacturing. The US and its allies produce a lot of the raw materials. China turns them into the things you actually need. Changing that is the goal of Pax Silica. India joined the initiative after Rubio visited New Delhi in the same week Trump was in Beijing, a detail worth sitting with. The diplomatic charm offensive and the strategic containment aren't separate tracks. They're happening simultaneously, sometimes within days of each other. The Philippines is the latest addition, and the geography matters enormously. Luzon is not just mineral-rich. It's about 200 kilometers from Taiwan. It sits right on the edges of the South China Sea, close to the shipping lanes that carry most of the world's semiconductor production. If you're trying to build an alternative manufacturing hub for high-tech supply chains, this is close to exactly where you'd want it. Now, the terms of the deal. This is where it gets genuinely unusual, and I want to be precise about it rather than just editorial. A 4,000-acre zone operating under US law, with diplomatic immunity, on the sovereign territory of another country. That's not a military base arrangement. That's not a trade agreement. The Wall Street Journal described it as the first agreement of its kind anywhere in the world. That's quite a sentence. The 99-year lease structure is the detail generating the most heat, and it's worth understanding why. 99-year concessions have a specific historical resonance. The British Empire used exactly this format, most famously in Hong Kong in 1898, as a mechanism for long-term administrative control over foreign territory. The Portuguese used it in Macau. When colonial powers took land, they didn't always say forever, they said 99 years renewable. The implication being that the arrangement would outlast everyone in the room negotiating it, and probably their children too. Whether that historical parallel is fair in the 2026 context is genuinely debatable. A voluntary commercial agreement between two governments is structurally different from an extraction by imperial force. But the Philippines has its own history with this specific question. The US colonized the Philippines after the Spanish-American War in 1898. The country achieved independence in the 20th century and has since spent considerable political energy reclaiming sovereignty over territory that American military presence occupied. The Philippine government agency responsible for converting former US military bases back into sovereign Philippine land is called the Bases Conversion and Development Authority. It exists because this exact question, who controls what land and under whose laws, has been a live political issue for decades. So when that same type of agency is now asked to hand part of that territory back under US jurisdiction for a manufacturing zone, it's not surprising that there's political controversy. Large protests have been happening in Manila for months over US military expansion in the Philippines generally. The Typhoon medium-range missile systems the US deployed to northern Luzon, capable of reaching major Chinese cities, have been a particular flashpoint. And now this. The Philippine government reportedly declined some of the most specific elements of the deal as described. The US law jurisdiction in particular is said to be in a gray area after domestic pushback. Helberg pushed back on this characterization publicly, defending the agreement in fairly aggressive terms on social media. He described the initiative as fundamentally a capitalist project and dismissed criticism of it from a French analyst, which is an interesting choice of framing for a State Department official whose job is diplomacy. What the controversy reveals, and this is the analytical point worth taking seriously, regardless of where you stand politically, is a structural tension at the heart of how the US is building its alternative supply chain strategy. The pitch to partners like the Philippines is, join us, align your export controls with Washington, get access to American investment and technology, and you'll benefit from the new supply chain we're building. But the fine print of the Philippines deal, as reported, asks the partner country to accept American legal jurisdiction on its own soil. That's not just a trade arrangement. That's a sovereignty question, and sovereignty questions tend to generate domestic political costs that allied governments have to manage. We've seen this pattern elsewhere. The US pressured Taiwan's TSMC to build a factory in Arizona. TSMC has done it, with significant US subsidies. But the relationship has been fraught. The US has at various points accused TSMC of intellectual property concerns, and there's genuine tension between Washington wanting the manufacturing capability on American soil and Taipei's understandable interest in keeping its most strategically valuable industry at home. You can be America's closest ally in the semiconductor world and still find that Washington wants to own the thing you built, not just benefit from it. The broader question for Pax Silica is whether this model actually works at scale. China's dominance in critical mineral processing wasn't built in a few years. It was built over decades, through sustained government investment, industrial policy, and supply chain development. Building a comparable alternative in the Philippines, India, and a handful of other countries is a legitimate long-term goal. But legitimate long-term goal and achievable in the time frame the US tech industry needs it are different things. The Philippines deal is real. The minerals are real. The strategic logic is real. The question is how quickly any of this actually replaces Chinese processing capacity, and whether the political costs of arrangements like the one on Luzon are manageable for the governments involved. Because here's what's interesting about the timing. Trump went to Beijing. The summit underdelivered, as we covered in detail on this channel. China didn't make the concessions on chips, rare earths, or trade terms that Washington was looking for. And within days, Rubio was in New Delhi signing minerals agreements, and the Philippines deal was in the Wall Street Journal. The message Washington is sending, to Beijing and to its own domestic audience, is that there's a plan B. We can build around you. Whether plan B is credible is the question China's strategic planners are presumably asking right now. And China's response to Pax Silica has been consistent. It's described the initiative as a new Cold War framework designed to contain China's development. That's not entirely wrong as a description of the intent, but it's also worth noting that China's own response has been to accelerate domestic chip development, deepen ties with countries the US isn't able to pull fully into its orbit, and use its rare earth export restrictions as leverage in negotiations. Both sides are building parallel supply chains. That's the structural fact of the next decade, whatever the diplomacy around it looks like. The Philippines deal is one data point in that larger picture. It's significant because of what it tells us about how far the US is willing to push the sovereignty question with its partners, and because of the domestic controversy it's generating in a country that has lived this history before. Whether it ends up as a genuine strategic asset or a political liability for Manila, and for Washington, depends largely on whether the terms that caused the controversy survive the ratification process intact. Right now, they appear to be in negotiation. This is James Whitmore. I'll see you in the next one.